Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the State Advisory Panel for Exceptional Children. This is the March 11th, 2026 meeting. I am Jared Sloan with the Office of Special Education and Early Learning. I am the facilitator of this meeting. Just a quick reminder for those online, in order to be counted in quorum, you must have your camera on at all times. So I see a few of y'all do not have your cameras on. So in order to be counted in quorum, you do have to have your camera on, unfortunately. And it's okay if you're eating breakfast or dancing a little jig, because I know that's what Cora's doing this morning. I see her. But we appreciate you all being on with us this morning. So I'll turn it over to Tiffany now to officially call our meeting to order. And she has the gavel if she'd like to use it.
So official. Call this meeting to order. This time we'll take roll call.
Sure. Okay, so I'll start. Alexandria Wright. You can just say present.
Present.
Thank you. Allison Amshaw, and you all. This is Emily Fox with her 606 accent, plus never having read these names before, so we're going to give me a little bit of grace. Allison Amshaw. Amber Ham. Amy Smith.
Present.
Thank you. Ashley Barlow. Cora McNabb.
Present.
Thank you. Eileen Hoover. Emily Fox, and I'm present. Heather McConnell.
Present.
Jackie Hawley.
Present.
Jackie, is that how you pronounce your last name?
Yes.
Okay, just making
Yeah.
sure. Jeffrey Coles. Jenny Ward.
Present.
Jessica Moore. Tal Curry. Lachina oh, sorry, Tal, thank you. Lachina Carruthers.
Present.
I thought I saw her. Laura Tipton.
Present.
Layla Frazier.
Present.
Tiffany Clark.
Present.
Zachary Stumbo.
Present.
And Greta Hilton.
Greta's
Oh,
here.
is she there? That's here, okay.
Yes.
And that's all.
So have we met quorum?
Oh, yes.
Yay.
All right, so we'll start with Greta Hilton for her welcome this morning.
All right, good morning. Can you hear me okay? Okay, good, perfect. I apologize. I needed to be off-site today because I'm actually attending the Council for Exceptional Children Conference. So I apologize that I'm unable to be with you in person, but I'm happy that I'm able to log on here and join virtually. And I have a very short few slides that I want to go over with you. Jared, do you want me to share those from my screen here, or is it easier for you to do that there in the room?
I've got them here, Greta.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so we'll pop over to the next slide, please. So what I wanted to do this morning was just take about 5 or 10 minutes and quickly go over with you the vision and mission of the Office of Special Education and Early Learning, give you a very brief introductory into the organization of the office, share a couple of accomplishments with you, and just give you a teaser essentially for what we're going to do next time when we're going to dive in a little bit deeper into the work of the divisions. But you know, as this is a very newly formed state advisory panel, I did want you to have some basic information as you begin working and through the functions of the panel. So this will hopefully give you a little bit of information before you go into the presentation with John in a little bit. So as you can see there, the mission of the Office of Special Education and Early Learning is to improve educational outcomes for diverse learners and early learners through effective support, technical assistance, training, coaching, and guidance. And we do that through our North Star priorities. You'll see there on that slide in front of you, we have, the 3 pillars on the side. And when we initially established this, the office was established in 2018 under a reorganization. And of course, what happened shortly thereafter, we went into the worldwide pandemic and we focused on, mitigating the impacts of the pandemic. But when we returned in 2021, I guess, late 2020 into 2021, as we were coming back out of the pandemic and looking toward the future, we worked within our office and with some other stakeholders to determine what were going to be our 3 foundational pillars. And we believe that special education and education for all learners essentially begins with a foundation of compliance. And I often refer to that as the floor of opportunity. It's the basic entitlement for students with disabilities under the law. But we believe that's not enough. We believe that is just the beginning. As I mentioned, it's the floor of opportunity. We believe that next, our students must have equal access and opportunity for educational, in order to get toward improved educational outcomes and results. And we do that through 8 North Star priorities. And our office works through our strategic plan toward improving these eight North Star priorities. And you'll see there, these range from, and I'm not going to read all these to you, but they range from, attracting, recruiting, and retaining high quality staff all the way toward effective instruction discipline practices. And we believe that essentially it takes the entire community. We believe that our educators, administrators, families, and students are all part of the equation that leads us toward improved outcomes for students with disabilities. So the office, what we refer to as OSIL, we essentially have a core staff of office level folks that work directly for me, and that is the people who work directly within policy, data, and finance. And the reason that when we had this reorganization, we modeled this structure, if you will, after the way that the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Special Education Programs is structured initially. And so we determined that it was best to keep policy, fiscal, and data at the office level and communications. And the reason for that is because we wanted it to have a office-wide presence and structure across all the divisions. And we'll talk more about that next time. But then within the office, there are essentially 5 divisions. You'll see some of those are called units, and I'll explain that as we get closer to that, because we initially started out under that reorganization with the 3 divisions. And we have the Division of IDEA Implementation, and it says preschool. It's essentially programming. I'll explain that as we go through this slide. It's a little bit confusing, but that's led by Veronica Sullivan. And within what we refer to as DIP, we have the Guidance and Support Branch, Gifted and Talented, and Extended School Services. And, I said we modeled this after OSEP because they keep their monitoring branches separate from their support and instruction branches. And so that's what we wanted to do too, because we know it's very difficult to receive a monitoring visit from the same people that are going to provide technical assistance. It's always nice to have fresh faces. And so the Guidance and Support Branch, they do just exactly that. Then the Division of IDA Monitoring and Results, or what we call DIMR, is led by Caroline Morrison. And this is where the monitoring lives, as well as our state performance plan, annual performance report, IDA formal written complaints are over there as well, and the individual programming branch. And this is where all of the monitoring occurs. And then we have the Division of State Schools led by Shannon Sparkman. And this is the Kentucky School for the Blind and Kentucky School for the Deaf. Then we get into units. And so, as I mentioned earlier in the slide, I said Veronica's group. Oh, thank you. That got bigger on my slide. Thank you. Veronica's group is called the Division of IDA Implementation and Preschool, Well, fast forward from 2018, a couple of years, and we decided to elevate preschool into its own unit, but it's not officially been reorganized into a division, even though it operates as one. So it's officially a unit, but it operates much like a division. And currently that director position is vacant. Melody Cooper, who's also our policy advisor in OSIL, she has graciously stepped up and been leading as an interim administrator for quite some time. I will share with you that position was just recently posted and I think closed just a couple of days ago. So we'll shortly be reviewing applicants and moving forward with that. This is where the school readiness branch and all the preschool folks live. And then the other unit is the transition education unit, which is led by Dr. Jason Wheatley. And this is funded entirely through federal grants. We have the DIF grant as well as the SPDIG grant over there. And he and Dr. Allison Johnson have written, I think we have about $14–15 million worth of federal grants over there in that office focused on teacher support and transition support for students with disabilities. And we'll share much more in depth about those during your next meeting. Next slide, please. So as you know, we receive a substantial amount of IDEA federal funds from the U.S. Department of Education, and those funds, the bulk of those funds go to local education agencies or school districts through our flow-through funds. We also have a small amount of funds that we use for administrative funding, with approximately 90% of this office being funded by those administrative federal funds. And just for your reference, we have, there are several hundred staff in this office because we count, the School for the Blind and School for the Deaf. So we have well over 200, closer to the 300 range of employees in OSIL, but there's approximately 70 of those are the Frankfurt-based staff. The Frankfurt-based staff are 90% funded out of these IDEA dollars. Then we have what's called discretionary or state set-aside funds, and those are used at the discretion of the state to determine or to support ongoing needs across the state. And you'll see here, these are our technical assistance providers. This is where the bulk of our funding discretionary funds go, because we know at the SEA, or the State Education Agency, we're unable to provide all the support to local schools and districts and families unilaterally and independently. So we rely on a number of providers to help us do that. Always looking for, feedback on the effectiveness of our providers. And we work very, very closely with our providers to ensure that school districts and families have the supports that they need. Next slide, please. And then we have our regional providers that are essentially outreach folks from OSIL. They're extensions of the office, if you will. And those are our special education regional technical assistance centers, as well as our early childhood regional training centers. There are 9 SERTACs across the state, and they are our boots on the ground support to local school districts. The 5 RTCs are boots on the ground for our preschool folks. And so, and again, the bulk of our technical assistance funds, the bulk of our discretionary funds are provided to these technical assistance providers to provide timely and effective support to all local school districts. So a couple of other things that I want to share with you that are celebrations, but I also want to say we strive for continuous improvement, and we know that even though we've got a lot to celebrate, we still have work to do. But one of the greatest accomplishments, I think, for Kentucky that I want you to be aware of is that each year Kentucky receives an annual determination from USAID around our performance under Part B of the IDEA. We have, for 16 consecutive years, received a meets requirements. And that sounds pretty underwhelming, but that is the highest score that a state can receive from USAID. We are only one of 3 states to achieve this level of meets requirements for this many consecutive years. And we do this through the local school district data. That's important to share that we gather data through our state performance plan every year. And then on February 1st, as part of our annual performance report, we submit those data to US Ed, and that's where this determination comes from. It occurs through the monitoring of our compliance indicators as well as our results indicators on that SPPAPR. And then another celebration that I want to share with you on this slide, you'll see what's often referred to as the 8 puzzle pieces of general supervision. These are the 8 components of general supervision that is specifically required under the IDEA. So the federal law says that these are the areas that states must monitor and pay attention to as they're providing special education services for students with disabilities. And in 2020, the U.S. Department of Education notified Kentucky that we were part of a cohort 1 for the differentiated monitoring and results, which was their terminology for the federal monitoring activity. They pivoted away from that when the pandemic hit, but came back to it, and we spent the next couple of years in a very intense, very involved monitoring activity from US Ed. What I want to share with you is that we had no corrective actions. There was one identified noncompliance, but it was a very small noncompliance. We had forgotten to put the grant award on one of our physical documents, and so we were able to quickly add that, and that took care of it. So we didn't have any additional corrective actions. And I will share with you, this is a very intense multi-year long monitoring activity. And of course, they examined the state to determine, have we met our monitoring responsibilities under the IDEA for local school districts. And so, a hooray to not only my team, but the work of all the folks across the Commonwealth that are working in special education and all of our local school districts for the hard work that they provide each and every day for their staff and students who are receiving special education and related services. And we can share more about that. I don't want to take up too much time this morning, but I did want to share with you the overall structure and some accomplishments. And then I will stop there, see if you have any questions for me. And if not, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Sloan. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So let's just talk really quickly as our basis about our purpose for the State Advisory Panel for Exceptional Children. And by the way, we do know online that some of y'all were having difficulty with some of the views. I think our wonderful, supportive tech staff back there is working on trying to optimize that as much as possible for you. So we appreciate your understanding and your patience where that's concerned. So, and John with Tace is going to go into a little bit more detail about this and some of the requirements of the panel and the purpose of the panel. But the SAPEC purpose, the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, requires that states establish advisory panels to advise and assist the Kentucky Department of Education on special education and related services for children with disabilities. So you are a very valuable part of this process. The SAPEC members represent various agencies, individuals with disabilities, parents of children with disabilities, service providers, and administrators. So let's just look really quickly at your duties. And again, John will cover this again in just a few minutes. So this is, and those of y'all who are around the room who know your legalese, it says must. So that's do not pass go, do not collect $200. So this is what you must do as a panel. Advise the State Education Agency, the KDE seal, of unmet needs within the state in the education of children with disabilities. Comment publicly on any rules or regulations proposed by the state regarding the education of children with disabilities. Advise the State Education Agency in developing evaluations and reporting on data to the Secretary under Section 618 of the Act. Advise the SEA in developing corrective action plans to address findings identified in federal monitoring reports under Part B of the Act, and advise the SEA in developing and implementing policies relating to the coordination of services for children with disabilities. So just a couple of meeting norms here. I got these a little bit out of order, so I promise you I will reorder these for the next meeting. Interpreters, our friends, are provided at each SAPEC meeting. Members must speak when called on for roll call or any voting. Since we do have online participants today, every vote that we take, which there's not a lot today, will have to be a verbal roll call vote. So we can't just do it by aye or nay as a group. It actually has to be an individual roll call. So we'll propose something, ask you to say your name, and then how you voted on that item. When speaking, and I did not do this, I am sorry for my interpreters back there, please state your name each time so the American Sign Language ASL interpreters can communicate who is speaking to those using interpretive services. Reminder, stay focused on the topic agenda at hand for the sake of time, be that in regular business or in committee meetings. Meeting materials are located in email and posted in the SAPEC meeting Google folder. Hopefully everyone was able to get to that. I did get one request that was a little strange, and it wasn't a name that matched anyone on the panel. So if that's you, just reach out to me and we'll take care of it. Additional feedback from members is provided through the meeting exit slip. And please have your camera on and mute your microphone when not speaking. When participating online and you wish to ask a question, please click on the raised hand. It looks like this, like you're swearing in for testimony, and wait to be recognized. Now, I will tell you, the look I have here is a little difficult for me to tell who has a raised hand, so I will do my best to try to keep an eye out for that. So, we'll turn it over to our president, who will proceed from here. And
So official. Tiffany Clark, I do have a question. Since we did have someone else come in, do we need to add that to roll?
we do.
Okay.
That's very good.
Eileen Hoover, present. Just say present.
Present.
Awesome, thank you. You're officially on the roll now. Thank you.
Okay, at this time, we will look at approval of minutes from last meeting. Is there anyone that wants to make a motion to approve?
Laura Tipton, I'll move to approve the minutes.
Is there a second?
This is,
Go ahead, Cora.
this is Cora. Go ahead. I'll second it.
All right, at this time, we'll do roll call.
Emily does
And do I need to do a roll call for
this.
those who are
Actually,
not
I
here?
apologize. You do not have to do that for those that are not here. It's
Okay.
actually right here if you want to follow that. So it's actually you, my apologies. That's what you were asking.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, so I will do roll call. Alexandria Wright,
Alexandria Wright is present.
They're saying present. We're voting on the minutes.
yes, sorry, it'll be, we are voting on minutes. So an aye or a nay? Alexandria Wright,
Aye.
Amy Smith,
Aye.
Cora McNabb,
Aye.
Eileen Hoover,
Aye.
Emily Fox,
Aye.
Heather McConnell, Jackie Hawley,
Aye.
Jenny Ward,
Aye.
Tal Curry,
Point of order. Just a reminder that if you are online to vote and count for quorum, you must have your camera on. So unfortunately, we'll have to come back to Tal.
Lachina Carruthers,
Aye.
Laura Tipton,
Aye.
Layla Frazier,
Aye.
Tiffany Clark, aye. Zachary Stumbo, Tal Curry, the minutes are approved. Our next item would be Melody Cooper with OSIL for our legislative update.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Melody Cooper. I'm glad to be here with you and see so many in person today, so that's great. Okay, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So I am the policy advisor here in the office, and I'm going to just provide you with a legislative update of what's going on right now since we are in the midst of the General Assembly session for 2026. Oh, thank you. You mean you don't want me to say next slide? Okay, so we're just gonna go through some fun facts, what's dropped so far, or really what's dropped now, because nothing new can go anymore. And then what we can stay tuned for. And any time along the way, if you have any questions, just feel free to stop me and ask any questions. And if I can't answer it right now, I'll find the answer for you. All right, so I always like to start with just a brief overview of what we're talking about. I know some of you may be more aware of how the process works than others, but I'll just give a little bit of a background here. So what's happening right now, the Kentucky's General Assembly is meeting, and what they're working on, because we hear all these terms thrown around, the KARs and KRS, statutes and regulations. And what the lawmakers are working on right now are the statutes. And so what they are writing, all of the bills that they're proposing or passing, those are statutes, Kentucky Revised Statutes, and we call them KRS. Then you'll see on the slide there that the next level down, so this is kind of the overall landscape here, everything's within the Kentucky Constitution. Then we have court decisions that can impact the Constitution or statutes. And so the lawmakers are working on the statutes. The next level down that we hear talked about a lot too are the KARs, or the Kentucky's Administrative Regulations. Those they carry the weight of law, but they are written by state agencies. So they're written by the agencies in our state government that support the statutes that they're assigned to. So here at the Department of Education, we write and amend regulations that support all of the statutes around education law. And we still take those to the General Assembly for final approval, but those are written at the agency level. And then finally, most state agencies also put out non-regulatory guidance. So it doesn't carry the weight of law, but we typically, we're kind of putting in plain language how you might carry out the law that's written in the statutes and the regulations. And so those are things that you'll find posted on the website a lot, where any guidance that we put out would support the law, but it just makes it a little bit easier for understanding and implementation. So that's what's going on right now. I can't even say next slide, Jared. So again, the General Assembly right now, they're working on the bills, the statutes. And so if you want to, follow up and kind of dig a little deeper and find out more on anything that we talk about here, I highly recommend that you get familiar with the General Assembly webpage. And I always forget to put the address on here, but I think it's legislature.ky.gov. Is that right? Yeah, legislature.ky.gov. And I can send that later if you need. But I could spend like half a day just going through this website with people because there's so much that you can find if you really start digging. But if you want to just go look for bills, like when you hear about this bill or that bill, this is where you can find it. On that home page, where I've got the big star and click here, it says current bills in the 2026 regular session. That's where you'll find them. And I also encourage people to go out here and look at them on your own, because sometimes if there are things floating around, like I know we see a lot of this stuff on social media, sometimes the most current version isn't what's out there. Or, sometimes things are reported on from one perspective or another. And so this is a way for you to go find the bill. If you've got questions about it, find it and read it for yourself. So I encourage everybody to do some clicking around on that homepage. You can find lots of stuff there too. All right, so if you're going to find a bill and you've clicked on that button, there's a couple little clicks, but it's pretty self-explanatory. You can find House bills, Senate bills, and all that. I just like to show what you might see if you click on a bill. This would be the landing page. And so you can get a lot of information here. Of course, the bill number, the title of the bill, which gives just a really broad overview about the subject matter. And then there are different versions, like a lot of them right now say introduced or current. This is one that actually passed in the last session. So you'll see some extra stuff there. They've got that Acts chapter, whatever it is. My glasses don't see that far. That's because that one was finalized, and so it's actually recorded in our Kentucky Acts, and so that was passed into law. But whenever you're trying to find a bill, make sure you're looking at the most current version. So you can either find current version, or sometimes you can scroll down and find any amendments or substitutes that have been added to a bill as well. Here on this landing page, you can also see the bill sponsors. Sometimes that can be a clue as to how much momentum a bill has as well. Sometimes you'll see a bunch of names listed there if a lot of them are signing on to it. Now, not necessarily, that's not a rule, because you can see there this one passed and there were only 2 sponsors. But if there are a lot, sometimes that means it might be a priority. You'll also see a summary of the content matter. Now, right now, I do want to give a brief caution, because this one was passed into law. You can see a summary of the final version. Right now, nothing has passed that far yet. I think maybe, I don't know, there might be 1 or 2 out there that have actually gone all the way through. But most of them that we're looking at right now for education, they have not been passed. And so the summary that you're going to see is of the original version. You want to make sure you keep scrolling down to see if there were any committee substitutes or House floor amendment, or House or Senate floor amendments added, so that you can see the most current version of things. So it can get a little tricky, but the more you scroll around and click around and get used to that, the easier it is to find the most current version of what you're looking for. All right, and then just a quick looking at how you look at a bill. So when you open one up, you'll see the title there, and each section tells you what part of the law is being amended. A lot of times it's amended. Most of what they're doing is they're taking their current law and they're making changes to it. Now, sometimes you'll also see a lot of a new section of KRS blah, blah, blah is being created. So they're tacking something on there. And every now and then you'll see that they're repealing a section of law, which is, just doing away with it altogether. So pay attention to those section headers. If there is no law listed there by the section header, then sometimes that means they're adding some language, but it's called non-codified language. So it still would carry the weight of law, but it's just not being added to a section of current law. So just a little clue, if you don't see a KRS listed there, it's still pretty important. It's just kind of a way around. It's making law without law, I guess. Sometimes they do that in the budget bill a lot too. So those are things to watch for. Then you can see the body of the bill that contains the bill language. And I'll go ahead and flip to the next slide. Oh, and just another note on those sections. A lot of times, like if they're doing something, if they're making a change to one law, it impacts another one too. So if you keep scrolling, you'll see each section will usually note, and now, now this is the KRS that's being amended. So they go through and make everything align. And then when you're reading a bill, you can see that anything that is in bold, italic, underlined is new language that they're proposing to add. If it is in strike through, then they're proposing to remove that current language. It's already there. And then anything that is not, doesn't have any formatting is just already currently in that law. Okay, so any questions there before we move on to what they've been working on here lately? Okay. So I've already, when I was looking this morning, making sure that I was ready here, I totally forgot to put House Bill 1. So House Bill 1 is one that's gotten a lot of attention. It's not up there, but I'll talk about it just a little bit. So House Bill 1 was actually passed. So a little background information. For the past several years, one of the priorities of the General Assembly has been to kind of codify a funding mechanism for public charter schools, because we do have some laws around public charter schools on the books, but there are currently, nothing really happens with this because there's no funding mechanism. That's been a priority for the past several years. Was it last biennium that they passed something? Okay, so it was the last biennium in 2024 that there was a bill passed that would allow this funding mechanism. I'm giving the broad strokes here, but that would allow for a funding mechanism. It went through some legal battles, and the Supreme Court of Kentucky recently decided that that was not constitutional, and so that they weren't going to be able to go that route. And so right after that decision came out, House Bill 1 was filed, and it is actually one that's already made it through. It's sitting on the governor's desk right now. He may or may not sign it. If he doesn't sign it, it doesn't really matter. It can still become law without his signature. But this is where Kentucky has decided to opt in to, and I'm going to read this to make sure I get it right, to the federally allowed qualified elementary and secondary education scholarship federal tax credit established under United States Code. And I'm going to go ahead and say I even only have a broad understanding of this, but basically what it allows for states, this was a federal allowance, but states have to opt into it. So Kentucky is proposing to opt into this. What it allows is I think it's up to a $1,700 tax credit for, like, if you were going to owe federal taxes, and you could use up to $1,700 of what you would owe federally to instead divert it into this fund that could allow for scholarships for like private school types of things, different educational costs. It puts the Secretary of State in charge of this, and it basically allows for a scholarship fund to be set up for Kentucky students. It's very broad what funds can be spent on. I think there are parameters about who could qualify, but it's a pretty hefty population of Kentucky when you're talking about the federal poverty level that it includes. I think it's
60% above the average median income,
Yeah.
which is any household and family making under $192,000 a year.
Yeah.
Well, pretty much every Kentuckian will qualify.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So,
Sorry.
so that's what it's going to, put into place is this. Now, I know that there are different, there's not a lot of solid information about what would happen after this right now, but that's what's in the works right now. So it would allow for the scholarship fund to be in existence in Kentucky. Kentucky is, they're proposing to opt in. So we will keep following that and see what happens. If you have any questions on that, I'm going to go ahead and say I'll have to take them down and, research it, because it's complicated, and I've just got the broad strokes, but it sounds like you might be able to help us.
Might have dove into that one a bit.
I can imagine, I can imagine. Okay, so that was House Bill 1 that I forgot to put on there, but it is there. All right, so House Bill 67, this is a traceable communications cleanup. So if you'll remember last year's Senate Bill 181 that passed, it put a lot of restrictions on district staff being able to communicate with students, you know, for the protection of students. And so kind of trying to do away with being able to text privately about things. And it ended up well-intentioned bill. It had some unintended consequences that made things pretty difficult for district staff in some cases. And so the bill sponsor, interestingly, there's a Senate bill that's very similar. This one actually goes a little bit further, this House bill does, but it's just some cleanup that it really specifies who would be included in this, where you have to use a traceable communication system that the district identifies. And it also cleans up a little bit like what could be considered a topic. So like text messages about when a group is on a field trip, you know, those were things that were impacted through the first bill, and now they're trying to clean it up. So just to make things a little bit easier, I think the districts are welcoming this one. House Bill 253 is Representative Tipton's bill about language arts instruction, and it requires research-based curriculum and interventions, specifically disallowing 3 cueing reading methods. So anything that would involve the 3 cueing method of a reading instruction is being my words just escape me. They're going to be not allowed to have it in their curriculum anymore or use it as a teaching strategy. And then it also provides for some required educator training in the science of reading by, I think, 2029. House Bill 257 is one that the department actually helped work with the bill sponsor on this, about the assessment and accountability system. That one has actually, and also the House Bill 67 also has gone through the House, and it's waiting for assignment in the Senate right now. House Bill 257, same thing. It's passed through the House and it's waiting for assignment in the Senate. And so this is where we're looking at an accountability system that would add local qualities, local indicators of quality. So a lot of community and family input would be required. Vibrant learning experiences would be part of that, school climate, and also adding a student growth measure for accountability that I think districts feel pretty positive about from what we've heard so far. So that one, again, is waiting for a committee assignment in the Senate to be heard in a committee. House Bill 307, that one has also passed through the House and is waiting for assignment. It creates a proactive post-secondary admissions program for students. This one has undergone a little bit of amendment throughout the process. It basically requires districts, the Department of Education, and the Council on Post-Secondary Education to work together to make sure that students understand their eligibility for different post-secondary opportunities. So a student might receive a letter from certain Kentucky post-secondary institutions saying, hey, based on what this information that we have about you, you may qualify for acceptance at such and such university or technical school or whatever it is. And here are the steps that you can take to apply and be, you know, actually accepted. Now, one of the things they added was an opt-in because it involved a lot of data sharing, student data sharing, so there's opt-in for families for that purpose. House Bill 383 is one that's put in place to help children of military families, and this one's specifically about the individual education program. So if military families are moving into Kentucky and their student has an IEP, this puts some requirements for districts to really put some of those things into place, adopt or do an initial evaluation within a certain time frame. So it's just trying to make sure that our military families are protected and those kids are getting services as soon as possible. Now, I will say it is already federally required that those IEPs are implemented with comparable services as soon as a student arrives. But I think, you know, Kentucky just wanted to make sure that this was memorialized here in our state. House Bill 389 is Representative Heverin. This one has also made it, you'll hear me say a lot, this one has made it through the House and is waiting for committee assignment in the next chamber. Right now, they haven't done a whole lot of hearing bills from the opposite chamber. I'm not sure what they're, you know, if there's some strategy going on with while they're waiting, but they have, I think yesterday there were a few House education bills finally heard in Senate committees that had made it all the way through the House. So maybe they're starting to roll on that, but a lot of these have been through one chamber and just kind of waiting for their assignment in the next chamber, but something will move eventually. They don't have much longer left, so they'll get going eventually. So House Bill 389, this is Representative Heverin's bill. There's some things in there about reading and writing instruction in schools, but one of the things is that currently districts may have a policy about dyslexia, and this makes it where districts shall have a dyslexia policy, and dysgraphia. So it would include some resources that would need to be available. KDE would be providing some of those resources as well. So it's trying to strengthen the identification and the supports for students with dyslexia and dysgraphia in the schools. House Bill 562, this is Representative Truitt's. It's another one that's waiting for assignment in the Senate. It's made it through the House, and it would create an alternative high school diploma, which would be, it's federally called a state-defined alternate diploma. Did I put alternative? I put alternative up there. I think it's supposed to be alternate. Sorry about that. Cross that out and put alternate. It would create the state-defined alternate high school diploma. And so this is, currently we have an alternative. That's why I have the wrong term there. Currently we have an alternative diploma, but it doesn't really count in like the graduation rates. And so when kids are going to try to apply for jobs after high school, it can be difficult when they can't check that box that they have a high school diploma. And so this would allow, if this goes through, it would allow for an alternate high school diploma that actually would count towards a district's graduation rate, and students would be able to check that box that they've got the high school diploma. Dr. Hilton, is there anything that you want to add on that one? I know you've spoken some with the bill sponsor on that one.
No, I think you did a really good job of summarizing that. One of the things that I'll share is that through the state-defined alternate diploma, should that pass and Kentucky become a state to have a state-defined alternate diploma, then students who receive that could potentially be counted on districts' graduation rates, whereas currently they can't. And so that would be the benefit I have for districts. The benefit I have for students was just what Melody was talking about there. And, the idea would be to break down some of the barriers and challenges that our students with the most significant cognitive disabilities have when entering the workforce and checking that box of whether or not you have a diploma. So the intent behind this one, as I understand, is to help our kids be able to achieve jobs in the workforce.
Thank you, Dr. Hilton. And speaking of the workforce, there is even a piece in that bill that's outside of the KDE realm where they're also trying to work to create a list that would be available of employers that would accept this as a high school diploma, kind of just getting that positive word out there and trying to get the workforce employers ready for this as well. So there's a piece in that bill as well. It also protects students' right to FAPE because that students have a right to the free appropriate public education to FAPE until they either receive a regular high school diploma or they are age 21 in Kentucky till they reach the age of 21. And so this bill does specifically outline, and that's a federal requirement. So this bill specifically outlines that they would still have their right to FAPE because it would not be considered a regular high school diploma. So if they still wanted to come work on some transition activities in school, before entering the workforce, that's still available until they no longer are eligible for FAPE. Any questions on that one? Okay. House Bill 621, this one has not quite made it through the House yet. I believe it's posted as one to be passed on to the Senate here soon. And this is Representative Bojanowski working on class sizes for exceptional children and youth. So right now in statute does require that the department have regulations about class sizes and caseload maximums for students in special education classrooms. But it's not in statute. So Representative Bojanowski is proposing to add those limits to statute. And so, we did, she asked us about it as well too. We talked with her a little bit when she was filing this bill. So that one's out there right now. And again, it hasn't quite passed out of the House yet, but it's close. House Bill 882, this is one, this is Representative Truitt. This one hasn't really moved yet, but we just always really pay close attention whenever we see anything about disciplinary removals. It's setting up a system where a classroom teacher could remove a student for disruptive behavior. But the protections for students with disabilities are still in place. There are broad protections for students with disabilities related to disciplinary removals in schools, and districts and schools have to follow certain steps. So that still is there. But again, we always watch it because sometimes, even if it doesn't change anything about the law, sometimes we add a little bit of extra support for districts when those things come out just to make sure, that they're aware. There was recently filed a virtual schools cap on non-resident students. So any districts that are offering virtual programs, right now there's not a cap on non-resident students that they can take, and this would create that. This one's a fairly new one, so I don't think it's moved yet. And then we have House Joint Resolution 80, which directs the Department of Education to share a list of resources that are shared with families around the IEP process and any recommendations. We have a lot of things, out there, including technical assistance providers. So not exactly sure where that one's going. I don't think anything's happened with it yet, but we are looking at that one. And then an early childhood education governance task force has also been proposed through a resolution. We're watching that one. Of course, preschool lives in our office, and it's looking at wanting the state to kind of study the different governance models for early childhood as a whole, including childcare, Head Start, and everything, how those are governed. And so we're watching that one. So,
Can I ask a question
Sure.
real quick about 621, just because a lot of teachers were really concerned about that for caseload
Sure.
sizes and stuff. So what I'm looking at currently, when I pull the bill up, is that what our regulations are currently, or have those numbers changed? Because I can't see that the change is on here, but I have seen it in the prior regulation that was put forward.
So the regulation, we had proposed some amendments to the regulation that did include, it included an increase that would cover what's currently allowed under a waiver process right now.
Yep.
Those regulations, those proposed amendments were withdrawn. So that this bill right now, this bill would set those class sizes and caseloads.
Yeah, I was just looking and I couldn't, it looked like it was just a kind of change of wording, I guess, at the beginning, but it didn't look like it had changed the numbers. So I just say personally from the teachers I've
Yeah.
talked to, thank you. They were all very concerned when they saw the
Right,
larger numbers.
right.
And I understood it was like, to to match the cap sizes, which is happening anyway, let's be clear. Let's not pretend
Right,
our classes
right.
are all within these numbers, but I think seeing the larger numbers
Mhm.
made a lot of people balk.
Sure,
So
yeah.
happy to see those back down.
Oh, good. And one thing that this bill also does is something that has been needed is that it defines the special class because right now the way that the current
Yes.
that was part of our intention with amending the regulation as well was to provide some clear definitions that made it a little easier to follow. And so this would place that definition in statute. So,
Thank you, I appreciate that.
sure. Any other questions? Yes.
For the House Bill 389 with the dyslexia and dysgraphia, did they
Mhm.
also include any language for dyscalculia too?
There is already existing language about dyscalculate, dyscalculia.
The numbers.
I believe, but let me go back and look at that, and I can, like, after I'm finished, I can look it up, and then before you all wrap up for the day, I can provide that. But I think there's already some existing language about that, but I have to go look for sure.
The other question I had for that same bill is whether or not you knew that they were talking about how a child would have that diagnosis of dyslexia, dysgraphia to be given, because that's a tough one that I know as a parent, a lot of other parents have issues in trying to get those diagnoses and whether or not they address those types of issues.
Does this bill
Like-
address that?
Like, does it talk about like who gives those diagnoses or like how like somebody's gonna actually get them? Is the school gonna be able to give a diagnosis?
I
to-
don't think that this bill adds that. Again, let me go back and make sure. It does talk about in the toolkit, so it would require a toolkit. The department already has a toolkit, but it requires some more regular updating of that. And in the toolkit, that's where they get into the different things that, excuse me, things that you can look for. If I'm remembering correctly, I don't think that this bill adds that a district would diagnose dyslexia. But again, let me look at that, and before you all leave, I'll have a little bit more detailed information about that.
Thank you.
And as a reminder, if you are speaking, excuse me, Tiffany Clark, if we are speaking, so for our interpreters, if you'll state your name before speaking.
All right, so we'll move on to the Senate. There are less bills here, of course, because there are less senators. It's a much smaller chamber. So, okay, so Senate Bill 3, this is one that it's been through the Senate. It's waiting for assignment in the House. It creates some requirements around transparency for school district finances. I know I've heard that some think it goes a little bit too far because it just would be like really hard to manage for districts. But so I'm not sure what final version that might take. And I think the House maybe has even filed or is working on filing their version to address this. But it's really just about transparency for school district finances and having a lot of things publicly posted on the website so that the public can easily find it. Senate Bill 4 is another one that's waiting for assignment in the House. It's Senator West's bill on the Principal Leadership Program. And so what it does is it creates kind of a internship, for lack of a better word, for new principals, for newer principals. And it has certain things. I think the Department of Education would be largely leading this program, and there are certain topics that are required for them to have, and exceptional programming for exceptional learners is one of those. We were glad to see that. So that's one that is moving, but right now it's not, but it moved really fast when it first came out, and so they'll, once they get going, I guess we'll see what happens with that one in the House. Senate Bill 101 is another one that we're looking at because of the discipline component, and it adds a requirement for district employees to report to law enforcement assault and attempted assault. And so we did actually provide some language to that bill sponsor, which he added. We were really glad for that. which adds some language about, unless the staff member has a reason to believe that the student's disability caused them to not be able to comply with the code of conduct. So that was something that was added that we thought was important. So we're just watching that one too. Senate Bill 111 is, that one has not moved yet, but it's another one we're watching because there's some required recess for certain age students, like in elementary school, I believe. But then there's some language in there about using it for disciplinary purposes. So this, again, is another one that we're keeping an eye on so that if it were to pass, that we could provide support if any questions come out about how that might pertain to students with disabilities. Senate Bill 181, so this was the Senate version of the traceable communication system cleanup. This one was actually filed by the original bill sponsor from last year, Senator Tishner, to clean up that traceable communications piece. But this one went through the Senate and it's waiting for assignment in the House. And now the House has their own version. So not sure which one of those will go through. Senate Bill 191 establishes, this is Senator Carroll, who's really interested in early childhood, particularly in child care environments. But it establishes a kindergarten readiness performance-based child care incentive pilot. That's a mouthful. It's interesting. It basically gives a monetary incentive for if a child were in an early care environment and then they were to go on to be kindergarten ready. It provides some monetary incentives to whatever that early care environment is. So it even includes some language where parents at home could, so just interesting. We're watching that one. That one is, it has been through the Senate and right now it's been assigned to the House Families and Children. I'm blanking up here, sorry. The Families and Children Committee. Not sure if it will be heard, but it has been assigned to a committee in the House. Okay, Senate bill, and I have that. Okay, I did correct it. It made it. Okay, I had a little typo up there, but I corrected that yesterday, and it's up there. Thank you, Jared. Senate Bill 318. This one was fairly recently filed. It has not moved yet, but it places some limits on digital instruction for elementary school students, some different timing things about how much time kids would be spending on digital instruction per day. Senate Bill 332 has an identical House bill filed, and this would require districts to implement surveillance systems in special education classrooms. And then maintain those systems and, have it be available for parental inspection if there's some issue that needs to be looked at. So that's one where it has not really, it was fairly recently filed, right towards the filing deadline. In the Senate, it hasn't been assigned. In the House, it has been assigned to the House Education Committee on primary and secondary education, but that doesn't always mean that it will be heard. So. And then, it would create, I think it's something that they're thinking could be a good thing to protect, everybody involved, but it also would be a cost on districts. So that would be something to consider for sure. And then Senate Bill 152 is one that turns, I know a lot of you probably are familiar with site-based decision-making councils at the school level. It takes those from decision-making to advisory councils instead of decision-making and really puts the principal more as that decision maker at the school level instead of the site-based councils. So I think that's all I have for the bills. So what is coming next? Any questions there before we move on from the bills? So this slide, we've already reached the filing deadline, so nobody can file any new bills. But don't worry, there are several education shell bills out there. And what that means is that they file a bill, and this is typical. I mean, this is every year, and it's not just in education. You'll see them in transportation. You'll see them for every subject matter, just about. But they call them shell bills because the title will say related to education, and then the summary will say something like to insert gender neutral language or to make technical corrections. So when you see that in the summary, that means it's an it's a shell bill. And they filed it before the filing deadline, and if it's like something comes up that they want to address or that they weren't quite finished working on before the filing deadline, they can use that as a vehicle for moving a bill. So we do have those on our watch list as well. There are several of them. So the veto recess is April 2nd through 13th. So that's when the governor has a chance to review everything that is passed through both chambers and made it to his desk. He's able to review everything and veto. Most bills, he has to either veto the whole thing, like all or nothing. But in the budget bill, which we do have a budget bill this year, he can line item in the budget. That's the only one he can do. And then the final 2 days are April 12th and 15th, where they would come back and deal with any vetoes that may have been handed down. Of course, we've got what's called the super majority in our General Assembly, so any vetoes by the governor can be overridden. And then the final day is April 15th. We continue to watch what's going on in the education committees and the appropriations and revenues committees to see what's going on with the budget bill. And I didn't put House Bill 500, the budget bill, on the list, but there is a second version of it. They had the first version out. It went quite some time before it was really addressed, and then they did make a few changes. There's a little bit of increase to SEEK funding. As in the past, transportation is about 80% or so funded, and that's pretty level from last year. It was described by Chair Petrie as a really bare bones budget. So they were working to, reduce overall spending, and then if things come up, that's where they're using their appropriations and revenues committee meetings to make decisions about new things being added in. And then, of course, they'll always end up filing a bill where they do some kind of one-off spending allowances as well. So I think that was all I had. If you're having some free time fun, you can go visit these links. There's the General Assembly website. You can find the calendars. You can watch live streamed or archived committee meetings and chamber meetings on KET and LRC's YouTube channel. So I think that's about it for me. I felt like I talked forever, but any questions? Okay. Well, let me know if any questions come up, before you leave. I can do some digging or research, and I will look at the, I'll look at that and see if I can get your questions answered before you all leave today. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Tiffany Clark. At this time, we're going to take a 10-minute break, and we will welcome John Copenhaver when we return. At this time, we're going to call our meeting back together. As a reminder, if you are online, please turn your camera on. We are going to do roll call again as well.
Oh, sorry. All right, I will repeat for roll call. Alexandria Wright, just respond with present, please, if you are.
Present.
Allison Amshoff. Amber Ham. Amy Smith.
Present.
Thank you. Ashley Barlow. Cora McNabb. Did we lose Cora? Eileen Hoover.
Present.
Emily Fox, present. Heather McConnell. Jackie Hawley.
Present.
Jeffrey Coles. Jenny Ward.
Present.
Jessica Moore. Tal Curry.
Present.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Tal. Lachina Carruthers.
Present.
Laura Tipton.
Present.
Layla Frazier.
Present.
Tiffany Clark.
Present.
Zachary Stumbo. And Greta Hilton. She had to bounce, didn't she?
Present.
Oh, no, she's still here.
So just a quick thing before we get started here. Back when I was a teacher, I used this thing called rule of 2 feet. So if you need to step away, take a phone call, go to the restroom, please use the rule of 2 feet and walk that way. If during this presentation, y'all need to do that because we took the early break, so we're not going to take one again until John is finished with his presentation. So letting John know that too. He's like, well, thanks for telling me, Jared. I appreciate that. Go ahead.
All right, at this time, we will welcome John to present to us our SAPEC purpose and duties.
Okay, well, great. Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you again. Whenever I've done this orientation for the panel, I've always been physically present. So this is a little bit different as far as Kentucky, but it's great to be here today. I'm looking at the list of people, and I know many of you, and it's a pleasure to see Greta. She is a wonderful friend, and I've kind of followed Greta throughout her grandchildren and all of those wonderful activities, and certainly as a state director. So, and Jared, thank you for having me, and your executive committee, Tiffany. Jared and Tiffany and I had a call a while ago about this orientation, but I have with me Audrey, who is kind of in charge of technology. So she'll be advancing the slides, and we'll go to the next slide. And I just wanted to, first of all, thank all of you for being here today, and thank you most of all for all you do for children and youth with disabilities in the state of Kentucky. You are really at a pivotal place as far as making change in Kentucky. I see the state advisory panels as being the most important group in any state. We have 57 states in our country if we want to count the territories and the Bureau of Indian Education. And so we have 57 state directors, Greta being one of those. And they are in charge of implementing the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act in their particular state. So again, it's just an honor to be here with you and to spend a little time with you. So we'll go to the next slide, and just a little bit more about myself and TACE. I'll talk about me first. Again, I'm John Copenhaver. I'm currently the program director. And when I say TACE, that stands for the Center for Technical Assistance for Excellence in Special Education. This organization has really been around since about 1980. And so it's been, and our primary goal here is to work with state directors of special education and also Part C coordinators and the interagency coordinating councils. And we'll talk a little bit about that group a little bit later. But these are some of our centers and our projects. My journey in special education, I was a special ed teacher, resource teacher for about 17 years. More grades 9 through 12, but I love that period of my career working with children and parents. And back in those days, we were still trying to figure out a lot of what we have figured out as far as the new law in special education. I was a school psychologist for a number of years, also a school district special education director. I've done a lot of work over my career in Indian education, especially with the Bureau of Indian Education. They have about 187 schools over 23 states. I think I've been to each one of those schools. I was the director of the Mountain Plains Regional Resource Center, which was a Office of Special Education Programs for a number of years, and then founded TACE about in 2003. And TACE is more of what you see there. We have the National Center for Paraeducators at TACE. We have two OSEP centers, one CIPHER, which has everything to do with fiscal issues in special education, and N Academy, which is all about digital accessibility. But most of our projects at TACE are projects that other OSEP centers are not doing. We don't like to duplicate efforts from the OSEP technical assistance projects, but we usually do things that no other center does. And so again, these are just some of the projects that we have at TACE. So next. Audrey, next. Just a little disclaimer, TACE does not provide legal advice. The Office of Special Education Programs has the final authority, and certainly the Office of Special Education and Early Learning in Connecticut. And so before we get right into the training, I had sent Jared some materials, and he sent those to you. I just want to review those very quickly. You should have an agenda that kind of overviews all of the topics that we'll be talking about today. There's a document called Leading Questions for the Advisory Panel, and we'll get to that here in just a few minutes. Probably the most important document that you have is your bylaws and operating procedures. And so you each have a copy of that. I'm sure that that's been provided to you before, but a lot of the presentation that I have and the slides are taken from your bylaws and operating procedures. So for you new members, if you read nothing else, please read your bylaws, because that'll give you a better understanding. You know, you have 8 pages of bylaws, so really not a lot to read there. You have a little brochure, and this was created by the Office of Special Education Programs. And Greta talked about the State Performance Plan Annual Performance Report a little bit earlier, but this is very user-friendly. And you know, the State Performance Plan Annual Performance Report has become quite complicated over the years, but this particular brochure really kind of lays it out, and it's very user-friendly for parents and other people that aren't dealing with this on a frequent basis. You have a document called the State Advisory Panel for Exceptional Children. That's taken right off your website and your panel part of your website. And that gives just a really nice overview of your purpose, your membership, just a few other issues in regards to the requirements of being an advisory panel member. You also have a membership, kind of a list of how Kentucky defines their membership. And it's very much in line with the membership requirements of IDA, but it breaks it down a little bit more. We'll be talking about that. There's a one-page document on your functions and your membership under IDA. There's a handout called Exercising Advisory Responsibilities. And that's just something I created a number of years ago. And it's just how pragmatically advisory works. and we'll go through that. I'll give you some examples. You have a one pager, and Greta had a slide earlier about the 8 components of general supervision. And that's become very, very important over the years. And when you went through your differentiated monitoring and support, it was really based on your general supervision system in Kentucky. There's a one-page document on the Part B indicators in your annual performance report, 18 indicators. And again, you're going to be hearing a lot more about those in your tenure as an advisory panel member. There's a one-page document that kind of lays out the differentiated monitoring and support process. Again, in Kentucky, you were one of the first states that went through that. You've received your final report, and it was a very, very positive report. So again, congratulations. And then finally, there is a one-pager on the Office of Special Education Program sponsors quarterly webinars for state special education advisory panel members. I happen to be on that planning group. So every quarter there's a different topic, and advisory panel members from throughout the United States join this webinar. So this handout will give you more information. If you want to sign up and be on the mailing list, you can certainly do that. I really highly recommend it, especially for the executive committee, because it really, really goes through, some of the things that we'll be talking about today, but in a little bit more depth. So so those are your materials. I think they're a good group of materials, especially for you new members. So we'll go to the next slide. And just again, the purpose in your bylaws, it talks about an annual orientation, and so that's what we're doing here today. And we'll be covering your purpose, membership, your duties, your bylaws, meeting procedures, and these trainings can either be 2 hours or 8 hours. So there's a lot to cover here. And for you new members, if you feel a little bit overwhelmed after this next hour and a half, just know that that's normal. There's a lot to digest, but as you get into it and you attend your meetings, it's like when we have a new job. It usually takes 6 months to a year to learn that job. So just know that, this is a learning process for you. Today is the beginning. And the nice thing is you have good people around you with experience. You'll be mentored along by Jared and Tiffany and the executive committee and other people. So, but the whole purpose is to put everyone on the same page, kind of the same level of understanding. And so as you go into your next panel meeting, hopefully you'll feel a little bit more comfortable, and some of the questions that you had in your mind will be answered today. So we're going to talk about the requirements of the federal law in relation to the advisory panel. And also I'll bring up some of the best practices. I usually get to about 25 to 30 states every year doing this orientation and training. So I have that opportunity to see how every state is doing this a little bit differently. The only commonality is the fact that all states have to adhere to the IDA requirements as it pertains to advisory panels. So next slide. We had our little puzzle pieces with general supervision. These are all of the essential components, I guess, of an advisory panel. You need to know your purpose. You have an executive committee that'll lead you. You need to know your functions and your duties, your meeting procedures. All of that is pretty much covered in your bylaws. You approach this responsibility as advisory. And so we'll talk a little bit more about advisory and what that really means. Terms, what are the officer terms and their duties, your annual report. Most every advisory panel every year submits an annual report that kind of outlines your recommendations and your suggestions to Greta and others. What are the membership requirements? Again, a little bit more about IDA and your partnership with the state director. So all of those put together will form a picture of your advisory panel. So we'll go to the next slide. And again, I know, and in talking with Jared and Tiffany, I know that this particular group of panel members are relatively new. And Jared, Tiffany, about how many of the assembled group here today would be considered new, approximately?
I'd say probably 80 to 85%, to be perfectly honest, John. I was just
Okay.
looking at, I think we only have 4 that are older than a year at this point.
Okay, so those would be the veteran members. Those veteran members will probably be doing a lot of mentoring of, and again, you new members, if you have questions, again, reach out to your executive committee, reach out to Jeremy and Greta and others. So, but I'm approaching this particular training as more of kind of a 101 version, and as we move forward in your tenureship, we probably but 101 is still a little bit overwhelming. But let's go to the next slide. I just put this leading question together. If you're having a hard time reading that, you can, that's one of your handouts. But, at the conclusion of our training here and our time together, I hope you'll be able to answer some of these things. One of the first is how did you feel when you were first appointed to the advisory panel? And when I ask people that, I get responses like, I feel honored. I feel really honored to be part of this group and being in a position to really making a difference. How do you know or do you know your partner group, your stakeholder group, on who you're representing on the advisory panel? And so each one of you were selected, and you're under a certain stakeholder partner group in Connecticut. And we'll talk a little bit. So, the big thing there is know that you're just not there to represent yourself, but you're there to represent that particular group of stakeholders as well. What is the overall purpose of the panel under IDA? We're going to talk about that. What is the age group of children and youth with disabilities that the advisory panel is representing? And every state is a little bit different that way. What is your understanding of various sections of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act? So Part C, Section 619, Part B, and again, we'll talk about that and what part you are representing under IDA. What are the membership requirements? What is your understanding between advisory and advocacy? Are you familiar with the duties and responsibilities of the advisory panel under IDA? And what is special education general supervision, and how does that relate to the advisory panel? That was a question that we didn't really ask 5-6 years ago, but it's become very, very important. And again, what is the purpose of the advisory panel annual report? So by the time we're done here together, hopefully you'll be able to go back and answer many of those questions. So we'll go to the next slide. And again, first of all, and I've mentioned this before, but congratulations. This is a big deal. And so you have a great deal of influence in improving results for children and youth with disabilities who are eligible under IDA. And so take your role very seriously, try to attend all your meetings, and your individual voice is very, very important. And so, you have a quorum, you have to have, I believe, 51% or more in attendance to even meet and do business. Now, unfortunately, I've been to some states where they have not reached quorum. And so it's, that's difficult. So, make sure that you're there. If for whatever reason you can attend, then reach out to the department to make sure they're aware that you cannot be there on that particular meeting. But very important to be there. You only have 4, maybe 5 meetings a year. So get those meetings on your calendar and hopefully you'll be able to attend. So next slide. I was talking with somebody at the Office of Special Ed Programs at the U.S. Department of Education a year or so ago, and they made this, we were talking about advisory panels, and they had made this statement: never before has there been such an emphasis and support for state advisory panels, promoting the potential role that they can play in improving programs and services for children and youth with disabilities. So even at the highest level, the federal level, you are held in high esteem. And so just know that I'm often, the advisory panels have been around since the Education of All Handicapped Children's Act back in 1975. And, I'm often asked, well, if the law ever changes, do you think they'll do away with the advisory panels? And I always say no. Even at the higher levels, this is an important part of the system and an important part of the process. So we'll go to the next slide. I love this quote from Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. So you are a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens. And in my experience in life and in special ed generally, it's that small group of thoughtful, committed citizens that truly make change and have made changes. So hopefully you'll feel that way, or you probably already do. The next slide is just something that I always say when I meet with a group like this is, your ultimate goal is to keep the main thing the main thing. And everything you do as an advisory panel, everything that was discussed this morning was all about children and youth with disabilities that are eligible under IDA. So, often I'm sitting at an advisory panel meeting and I'm thinking, how does this relate to children and youth with disabilities? And 99% of the time I can make that connection. So always know that it's truly about children and youth with disabilities. Next slide. And what we'll do now is this presentation is divided up into parts. And so after each part, if you have a question or a comment, just raise your hand, or Jeremy, if you see somebody, then let me know, but we'll give you an opportunity to to ask a question or get clarification. And Tiffany is there if in the executive committee, if I say something that is not quite the way it's done in Connecticut, then certainly we want to know that and get that clarification. So we'll go to the next slide. These are just the citations or the regulations under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. related to the advisory panel. And so CFR is Code of Federal Regulations, and it gives a citation. The general theme on the left, the establishment or the authority, the membership, the duties and the functions. There's a regulation around due process or due process hearings, and there's a regulation about what they call waiver. It's more of a fiscal issue. We won't spend a lot of time on that because it's more something that the Office of Special Ed and Early Learning deals with if it happens. So, but I just wanted you to be aware there are 5 regulations, and we'll certainly be covering all of these regulations in our time together. Next slide is just the name. You know, if you go to your bylaws, different terminology throughout the country. Some of the states call this a board, a committee, a council. I believe California calls theirs a commission. In Kentucky, you've adhered to the regulations. In IDA, it refers to this group as a panel, and Kentucky as well. So, so that is a little bit about, you know, name is very important. And the next slide really is right out of your bylaws. What is the name of the advisory panel? The Kentucky State Advisory Panel for Exceptional Children. And I really, really love your name because, again, you mentioned exceptional children in your name, which is great. The next slide is the purpose. And again, Jared mentioned this a little bit earlier, but this is the purpose right out of IDA. So the purpose of the panel is providing policy guidance with respect to special education and related service for children with disabilities in the state. Now, the key word there for me, I bolded it, is the guidance. So your purpose is to provide guidance. And other words for guidance are advice, recommendations, suggestions. And so, you know, you're guiding. And in your case, you're guiding the associate commissioner and state director, which would be Greta, and she certainly passes that on to her team and higher up if necessary. Now, if you look at your bylaws on the next slide, it's pretty much the same establishment. The panel is organized as required by IDA for providing providing guidance to the Kentucky Department of Ed on issues related to special education. Now, and by the way, I always really look at your bylaws, obviously, before doing a training like this. And I usually pass perhaps suggestions of maybe for changes in your bylaws. And I've got to say that your bylaws are some of the best that I've read. They are very comprehensive, very pragmatic as well. And an example of this is this particular part of your bylaws tells you who you're guiding, who you're suggesting, who you're advising. And it clearly says that it is the Kentucky Department of Education and specifically the Office for Special Education and Early Learning. So we'll go to the next slide. And again, your guidance will go to your state director. And a lot of the bylaws that I see across the country, you know, this to me is a very, very important, and I get that question from who are we really advising? So your bylaws point that out and spell that out. And we'll go to the next slide again about representation. And this is, again, very critical. You are representing your entire partner group. So everybody here, and we'll be going through the different categories of membership. But I'm sure when you were nominated and appointed, you were told which group you represent. Many of you are parents of children with disabilities. And so parents of children with disabilities are probably the group that you represent. So very important to know that you, again, that you're representing others other than just yourself, even though you are part of that group, and certainly your voice is very critical. And secondly, again, you're representing all children and youth with disabilities who are eligible under IDA in Kentucky. So those are the two things for you new members. If you've ever had that question in your mind, who am I really representing here? These are the two broad categories that you are representing. So we'll go to the next slide, but before we get into that very strongly, do we have any questions, any comments before we go on? Nadra, you can go ahead and advance.
Hey, John, this is Audrey. I don't know if your camera's off for us. I don't know if you meant to have it off, but I just wanted to let you know.
Oh, I'm sorry. There
Perfect.
we go. Sorry. Thank you for letting me know. Okay, let's again, just a little bit more introductory materials and overview. We'll go to the next two slides quickly. I always like to point out some of the acronyms that were, as you know, a lot of acronyms. Your Parent Training Information Center, other organizations in Kentucky probably have lists of acronyms and what they mean. But these are a few that we'll be referring to a little bit more in our training. But again, I'm not going to go through these individual. We'll get to those as we address each one of them. Just one I want to point out, Section 618 of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is that part of the law that has all the data requirements and probably includes the annual performance report. So data is very important. A lot of the decisions that you make or priorities that you decide on will be based on the data that you're seeing out there. The next slide, again, even though it's not part of IDA, the FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, very important, and it does adhere and relate to the advisory panel. You want to be very careful not to be mentioning a student by name or a staff member, a school district. So, making sure that we're keeping confidentiality, we're approaching our comments with respect. And so be mindful of FERPA, again, a federal law. And then, these others we'll ultimately talk about, just again, different parts of IDA. Okay, next slide. I wish we had time to have a discussion on this one, but again, think to yourself, when you were appointed to this advisory panel, what was perhaps a topic that you ultimately wanted the advisory panel to address? There's usually, questions in the advisory panel's minds about different issues, and maybe you as a parent of a child with a disability had an experience down, somewhere in the past, and you might want to talk about that. And maybe it was a challenging experience, or maybe it was a positive experience. And I wanted to mention, and I'll talk a little bit about this when we get to advisory, but everything we do with the advisory panel doesn't necessarily always have to be a challenge. It could be a positive thing going on in the state of Kentucky. So if you're seeing that and you want to bring that forward around a particular topic, and that applies to public comment. When an advisory panel has public comment, those making comments need to be aware that, it's about challenges, but yeah, if there's something good happening out there, we want to hear that as well. So we'll go to the next slide. And again, I had mentioned this a little bit earlier, but every state approaches this a little bit differently, and there's no right or wrong way except for the importance of adhering to federal and state regulations relating to the panel purpose, the membership functions. Every state has its own unique culture and climate. When I walked into your meetings, and usually they were held in Louisville during a major conference, and it was very exciting. But Kentucky has a unique culture and climate, and it's very positive. And as I went from Kentucky to maybe another state, it's a little bit different that way on how they operate. The one thing that, again, that you have in common is those regulations under IDA. So we go to the next slide. Again, these panels have been around since 1975. If you were on a panel way back in the mid 70s or 80s, your discussions as an advisory panel would probably be much different than they are today. So every advisory panel goes through a unique history, where when we went through COVID, that was the time where all of a sudden panels shifted their conversations and started to address an unmet need, which COVID certainly presented. And I was so proud of advisory panels across the country and state directors during that period of time, because, they did shift, they did pivot, and we hear those terms and to address. So there's going to be times where you might be working on priorities as an advisory panel, and maybe Greta will walk in and say, you know what, there's this challenge that we're experiencing, and we really need to maybe set some things aside, and I need your advice and recommendations about a particular challenge, whatever it might be. And certainly, again, that happened in COVID. So just know that a good indicator of a good advisory panel is fluidness and flexibility. And when that happens, don't let that throw you, because you'll come back on course eventually. But certainly there are events that could make that, during the time you went through the differentiated monitoring and support, that might have been a time that you focused on that process and what your responsibilities were at that time. So we'll go to the next slide. Again, this is a really crude org chart, and please excuse me, but I thought I always think it's important for you to kind of see where you fit into the big picture. And we're not going to spend much time on this, but we have the U.S. Department of Education, we have the Office of Special Education and Rehab Services, OSERS, and Greta and her staff interact with that office, as well as the Office of Special Education Programs. And the Office of Special Ed Programs, and again, Greta mentioned this earlier, they have a whole variety of technical assistance projects and centers that are excellent, excellent people. And state directors, states can call upon them for advice and technical assistance. And I, after looking at that slide that Greta put up, Kentucky makes use of those resources. They're usually free. So good people, good advice. And then if you veer off to the left of this, you have the State Education Agency. For you, that's the Kentucky Department of Education, the Office of Special Education and Learning. And under there, that's you, the Special Education Advisory Panel. So again, you advise the Office of Special Education and Early Learning. You do that under Part B of IDA. And Part B is usually all about school-age children, probably toddlers, the 3 years old to the 21-year-olds. So Tiffany, Jared, in Kentucky, what is the age range for the advisory panel as far as who they're advising around?
It's 3 through 21.
3 through 21,
Yep.
and that's pretty consistent. And again, if you go off to the right side, just know there's another advisory group out there in Kentucky. The lead agency is who oversees, but it's the Interagency Coordinating Council, and they usually advise around, the birth through 2-year-olds or the birth through or to 5-year-olds. And again, Jared, the lead agency in Kentucky, is that the Department of Ed as well?
I'm sorry, John, can you repeat that? I was answering a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Who oversees Part C in Kentucky?
There's a separate panel that the governor's office actually takes care of that here in Kentucky.
Okay. So just know there's another advisory group out there, and they advise around a different age level. And there could be a time where there's an issue like Part C to B transition or child find, where you might have a commonality there, and you might, perhaps work together on that challenge. But ultimately, again, the main goal for both these groups are, again, keeping that main thing, infants, toddlers, children, and youth with disabilities. So we'll go to the next, and again, this just kind of defines for you better the different sections of the law and what age levels that section of the law deals with. And if we go to the next slide, again, just ways that you can collaborate with that interagency coordinating council. And Audrey, if you could go to the next slide. Yeah. And to the next slide. Okay. Again, it probably will be rare that connection will be made, but again, Tiffany, is there anybody on the panel now that is also connected with the Interagency Coordinating Council under Part C?
Zach Stumbo for McKinney-Vento.
Oh, McKinney-Vento, okay. And you cross over between both groups?
I do.
One, again, just a suggestion, best practice. Again, a lot of the panels will include somebody that is also connected with Part C or Section 619 or Section 619, yeah. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And again, the last, and again, a partnership. The Office of Special Ed Programs is always talking about creating a seamless system in special education and making sure that we're all communicating with each other, which includes, the Part C, the Section 619, the Part B parts of special education. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And again, before we go on, any questions about anything so far? Okay. Just a real quick overview. I think every advisory panel member and most of you have had, maybe a course on special ed, but if we go to the next slide, this slide is just kind of listing some of the real major events. If we look back on our history, and we look maybe starting in 50 and going to current, the first thing was the parent movement and parents becoming very upset because there was a time and prior to the Education of All Handicapped Children's Act that a lot of children were denied a free, appropriate public education, and they were placed in institutions. One of my first jobs is I worked in a state institution that was for, rather severe children with disabilities, but, they didn't have a choice to go to a public school and receive a free, appropriate public education. So there was a lot of exclusion during that period of time. And then in the mid 70s, again, landmark Education of All Handicapped Children's Act was the first major law for special education. And during that same time, we had Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. And fast forward to the 90s, the Americans with Disabilities Act. That first law was a lot about compliance and just making sure that school districts and charter schools were adhering to the new law. And we certainly have compliance today, and compliance is important. And that's, again, one of Greta and her staff's responsibilities. But a lot of those early years was defining what we meant by FAPE, or free, appropriate public education. But ultimately, in the middle 80s, 90s, a lot of those children that were institutionalized, IEP teams were meeting, and they were moving those children back to their neighborhood schools. And that was a wonderful time in our history. I had the personal experience of being on many of those IEP team meetings where children that were in an institution were back in their home in their neighborhood schools. And so, we turned from exclusion to inclusion, and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the law was changed to be a more appropriate. A lot of talk about access and results. And then we went through the whole period of COVID and the impact. And then again, whenever we have a change in our federal leadership, then obviously there's going to be changes there, and we need to move in directions of the new federal priorities. And so, again, if you were on an advisory panel during any part of that, those were the topics during those periods of time. So if we go to the next slide. If you look at the written comments of every special education, the Education of All Handicapped Children's Act and IDA, these were comments that were made in the written comments. And one was all students with disabilities are general ed students first. And so even though we've created special ed, we're including children with disabilities, let's not lose sight that as those children enter public schools, they are first and foremost general ed students first. And then we address their needs in special education. And, trying to stay away from the idea that special ed is not a place or a program. It is support and services for those who are eligible. So even though we do have perhaps self-contained programs and other programs that work with children with disabilities. I remember my first job after 2 weeks on my job as a special ed teacher. I was called down to the principal's office, and I thought I was in major trouble, which I tend to do sometimes. But my principal, I've been very blessed with my supervisors over my career. But he said, "John, we're really, really happy you're here. It's been, it's been way overdue that special ed is part of our program." But he says, just know that your main job really too is working with general ed. You should be out there working with general ed teachers, imparting your knowledge about accommodations and modifications that could assist in students with disabilities being more included in general education. And so, you know, and he says, you are part of our total staff, you're not an isolated special ed person. And he had our program right in the middle of the school, right in the center of things. But he understood the big picture and the concept. And I really appreciated that. But again, as we're working on the advisory panel, we need to keep in mind those general uh, ideas and really what we should be doing. This next slide is a busy one, and I apologize, but and I'm again, it's just a legislative history of special education. So for you advisory panel members that are brand new, just know that this has really been a journey, and the journey is now, you know, around 50 years old. But it really started with when you see PL, that means public law. The first number in each one of these laws is the congressional number. So it was maybe the 89th session of Congress. And the last number is the number of the bill. This particular law was passed. It was like the 247th bill passed during the 90th session of Congress. So anyway, the first, obviously, Public Law 8910, the Elementary Secondary Education Act, that's been called No Child Left Behind. You know, when we have a new administration, it's sometimes the change is, or the name is changed. And so, if you go up further to the orange one, or not the orange, but the green one. It's now called the Every Student Succeeds Act. So that's the current name of the sometimes called not Title I. So, and that was somewhat recently. The name was recently changed in the last 4 or 5 years. So. But some of these, just to point out, again, if you look down towards the middle, Public Law 94-142, that's when we had the main law. And again, Section 504 come around about that time. We really weren't, you know, the original law mainly dealt with school-age children, to some degree toddlers. But in 1986, we had Public Law 99-457, and it was called Part H at the time. But those were the infants, so they were added in 86, and then in 97, the law changed from Part H to Part C. I don't know why, but it did. And the last reauthorization of the federal law occurred in 2004. And that's right at the top, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So the phrases on the right side of this are the main issues that advisory panels dealt with during that particular period of time. So it started with physical access, just getting children physically in buildings. I remember a building that I worked in, and we literally had to carry children from the first floor to the second floor. And again, 504 addressed a lot of that. But again, advisory panels talked about that. They talked about the new procedural safeguards or parent rights during that period of time. And again, in the late 70s, 80s, into the 90s, free appropriate public education, the individual education plan in the least restrictive environment. As we got into the 90s and the 2000s, accountability, and COVID emerged and panels addressed that. Just know that advisory panels were involved in all of these critical issues as they came up. And then in 2004, there was an addition for every state, every lead agency to develop a state performance plan, an SPP, and an annual performance report that evaluated that. And within that annual performance report were indicators. Right now, there's 18 indicators. You have a handout that lists all those indicators. As an advisory panel, and advisory panels got very involved with that and still do today because they're high risk. And again, as Greta had mentioned, every February, first part of February, every state submits an annual performance report on their performance around each one of those 18 indicators. And based on that, you're put in one of 4 levels of determination. And again, as mentioned by Greta, the last 16 years, Kentucky has met requirements. And again, that is something to celebrate. I mean, that is a big deal. And so you're going to be part of that. And especially as you get into the fall of the year, you'll probably have presentations from various staff members that'll talk about these indicators, what the targets are. You know, every indicator, there's a target that you want to go to and improvement strategies to get to there. So you might become part of maybe suggesting another target or an improvement strategy, whatever it might be. So anyway, for you newer advisory, just again, I think it's important to see that big picture. And, you know, again, it's been 50 some odd years. And are we there yet? No, we're not there yet. We still have a lot to do, a lot of challenges to address. So we go to the next slide. So again, the last time the law was changed, 2004, that was 22 years ago. And then again, IDA, 50 years old. And again, a lot of work has gone into this, a lot of change. Again, we still have a ways to go. Now, the next 2 slides, I'm not going to go, it just talks a little bit more about those 50 years and, you know, the fact that now the law guarantees a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment for eligible children. If we go to the next slide, it just shows you the number of children that we started in, you know, when data was starting to be collected, but we started with about 3,600,000 children, and now today we are at over 8 million children with disabilities under IDA, and that's age 0 to 21. But again, that's who you are advising around. So if we go to the next slide again, just again, you're not 504, but again, reauthorization or a change. It's been 52 years since the regulations were implemented for 504, the Rehabilitation Act. And that is now being looked at and being, you know, there'll be recommendations. So again, 504, 52 years old. So let's go to the next slide, and that is, so that's a little bit about the legislative history, where we were, where we're at. I know, again, we're not there yet, and that's why advisory panels are still in existence, because there are still challenges to be looked at, advice and suggestions given. So let's just go right into the membership. And this is really important, but again, this is a citation right out of IDA. The membership of the panel must consist of members appointed by the governor or any other official authorized under state law to make these appointments. In most states, it's someone else. The governor, as we know, is a very busy person. And so this is probably delegated out. And we'll talk about how that works in Kentucky. So you go to the next slide. And if you look in the law under 300-168 of IDA, these are the membership categories that every state advisory panel must have. And, you know, the more I look at this and I study this, the more I think, you know, when Congress put this together, and I knew they did it with the help of parents and advocacy groups and other people that gave recommendations. But when you look at this group, it is a powerful group. You know, parents of children with disabilities. If you are a parent of a child with a disability on the advisory panel, your child needs to be between birth and 26 years. So that was added in 2004. And then we have individuals with disabilities, teachers, representatives of institutions of higher ed, and that's usually your teacher training programs or your leadership programs at the higher ed level, state and local officials, administrators of programs. That's usually your local school district directors, charter directors, etc. State reps for child welfare responsible for foster care. Any of this that is bolded is because it was changed in 2004 or added. So we have reps of other state agencies, private schools, and public charter schools. In this list too, if you see an and, that means one of each. So with the reps, you need a rep from private school and a rep from public charter. At least one rep from vocational, community, business, organization concerned with the provision of transition services for children with disabilities. Again, representatives from state, juvenile, and adult corrections, and state and local officials representing homeless children. So, Tiffany, Jeremy, any vacancies right now? Do you have all of these categories currently filled?
We currently do, but we do have, I'd actually just double checked, 5 people who will roll off as of the end of June.
Okay, great. So you are, you know, the goal is to have everybody on the bus in the right seat, and it sounds like you do. And so that's great. Now, if we go to the next slide, and again, everyone on this call, probably when you looked at that list, you recognize which group. I call it your partner group or your stakeholder group that you do represent. And again, if you look at this slide, special rule, the majority of the members of the panel must be individuals with disabilities and parents of children with disabilities. And so again, if you look in the written comments of IDA, there was a lot of verbiage about who better can represent and provide advice than parents of children with disabilities and individuals with disabilities. So 51% of the panel on the line here today fit in one of those two categories. Okay, the next slide is right out of your bylaws. And I just wanted to point this out because in your bylaws, and I like this, you know, it lists all of those categories that we just looked at on the previous slide, but it also says how many will be in each category. So again, your bylaws say at least 2, again, at least 2 individuals with disabilities and so forth. So, you know, if you look at those in your bylaws and you do the math, this particular panel probably will have about 21 voting members, which is about right. Most panels have between 20, 21, and 25. I've worked with panels with as many as 45, and I'm not advocating for that. That's just, and we've worked on it. And the reason it got to that point is in their bylaws, they didn't specify like Kentucky does. So it keeps it at that manageable level. So if we go to the next slide, in the next slide, we'll skip over that one as well, Audrey, because we talked about the vacancies. But again, the demographics, a lot of advisory panels have maybe a subcommittee, and it's called the membership committee. And they deal with all issues around, vacancies or things that are coming up that you're going to need to nominate and so forth. But when you're doing your membership, it's important again to adhere to the categories. But members should be representative of the state population demographics and composed of individuals involved in or concerned with the education of children and youth with disabilities. So just be conscientious, I guess, or mindful of the cultures of Kentucky, rural areas, urban areas, gender issues, etc. And so, when you're putting that panel together, always best practice to think about the demographics and try to get. You're never going to be perfect on that one, but you just work in good faith and try to at least try to get a fair representation. So if we go to the next slide, again, and we've talked about that, one of your most significant contributions is representing that partner group. Federal regulations require and specify partners be represented by membership on the advisory panel. This requires the panel to consider methods that can facilitate ongoing communication between panel members and their partner group. And so, obviously, you parents of children with disabilities on the line, there's no way that you're going to be able to reach out to all parents in Kentucky. But if you have friends, if you have acquaintances, if you belong to other associations or organizations, and the advisory panel is dealing with a certain challenge or an unmet need, just talk to that person and get some ideas and their thoughts on it. And then perhaps bring that voice back to your next meeting. Again, this you just do the very best you can. And sometimes it's difficult. When I was a school district special ed director, I was also on the advisory panel on that in that state. And so when this school district directors met 4 times a year, I would always give kind of a report on the advisory panel and what the priorities were and the things that we were dealing with, and then ask them if they had any ideas or suggestions as well. So just do your very best, and you're all very, very busy people, but just, do what you can in that regard. Okay, let's go to the next, and then we'll go to the next, Audrey. And as far as tenure, again, this is right out of your bylaws. Members shall serve a term of 3 years, but you can be reappointed. So you'd have to go and request that you be considered for another term. And members shall not be eligible to serve more than 2 3-year terms, notwithstanding any partial term filled prior. And so, you have that opportunity perhaps to serve up to 6 years. And that's a long time. It's always important for an advisory panel to periodically change and other people come on with, new voices. So, so if we go to the next slide, again, as far as meetings, again, 4 regular meetings each year. 1 regular meeting will be scheduled in conjunction with a statewide conference. That was usually the one that I attended to do the the orientation. All meetings shall be open to the public, and accommodations for persons with disabilities shall be provided upon request. Notice of the meetings and the agenda shall be publicly announced per Kentucky's open meeting status. And that's another kind of law that you should have some, especially the executive committee. Every state in the country has their open meeting requirements. And your bylaws need to be consistent with that. The way you operate meetings needs to be consistent with that. And so, every state has a person in state government that is over this. Some panels invite that person in to give a 15-minute overview every year, or sometimes there's a short video on that online, and that's maybe something that you would show at a panel meeting. But just know that your bylaws are pretty much are and should be in concert or consistent with your open meeting statutes. So if we go to the next slide. Again, quorum, we've talked about this, simple majority. No member of the panel may vote on any matter that provides a direct financial benefit to that member. If it is a member that has a conflict of interest as defined by Kentucky's executive branch ethics commission, then they just need to let the executive committee know that. And you would just not vote on whatever that issue might be. But if it's an issue that would provide your organization or agency financial benefit, that would probably be conceived as a conflict of interest. So be mindful of that. That probably doesn't pertain so much to parents of children with disabilities or individuals with disabilities, but probably some of the government agencies that are represented on this committee. So if you go to the next slide, again, training and orientation annually. We'll go to the next slide. As far as priorities for you new members, again, I've mentioned read your bylaws, attend your meetings, do your work prior to the panel meeting. And one of the homework probably is to read, you approved your minutes of your last meeting today, so you'll want to read your minutes and be prepared to, approve those or not. Again, represent not only yourself, but your partner group. Participate. I've never in all of my years with advisory panels heard an inappropriate comment or suggestion. So, raise your hand, participate. I could write almost a book on especially new members, and I can tell they're hesitating because they are new and they might be a little bit, uncomfortable. But once they say what they say, I can't tell you how many times that really made a difference for that advisory panel. Very important. Work as a team. You are a team. And again, you are that small group of thoughtful, committed citizens. You're not an individual, but you're a team working together. Support each other and then ultimately make a difference. And I've seen this Kentucky panel make such a great difference for children and youth with disabilities in the state. So we'll go to the next. Again, resources, again, your bylaws, your open meeting requirements, and your annual report. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later. It's usually due the 1st of July, but especially new members, important for them to read that. I think your annual report gives a new member a little bit of better sense of what the advisory panel is all about. Again, your Office of Special Ed and Learning, Early Learning staff, and you've always done a great job. People come in, they introduce themselves and what they do for the state, so you get to know those people. Again, information on general supervision, that puzzle piece, and you're certainly going to know a lot more about that. Acronyms, and again, and really, this is an executive committee, but if somebody uses an acronym, Tiffany might say, "Oh, what does that acronym mean? Would you spell that out for us?" And then reimbursement procedures is if you're traveling, to your advisory panel meetings. And then the next slide is just, and you have this in your packet, just this national resource on webinars. If you would like to attend or get on that mailing list, that would be great. Okay, let's pause there just for a minute. I know you're getting tired, but we're getting there. But any questions or comments on anything we've talked about today? Okay. And Jared, I believe I have until noon. or-
12, it's actually 12, this is Jared. It's actually 12:15. Amy
Okay.
Smith does have her hand up with a question.
Oh, yes, Amy, go ahead.
Well, it's not a question, but I just want to say this is just this is great content. It's thorough, and I just think you've done a great job of explaining it. So just wanted to give kudos to you for that, and thank you for it. So I think a lot of people could benefit from hearing it. So I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Amy. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, let's go to just a little bit more about your executive committee. I think what we're trying to, between now and 12:15, we'll talk about your executive committee, your ad hoc committees, talk a little bit about Greta and what her roles and responsibilities are, and then talk a little again, what's the difference between advice and advocacy? And then we'll finish up with your duties, your 5 duties, and that's critical. That is very critical. So I'm going to pace myself with about 35 minutes left. We'll just kind of move through. But if you do have, if there's something I've said that is a little you don't understand, please raise your hand and Jared will bring that to my attention. So let's go to the first slide. Again, your executive committee, you have your chair, your vice chair, and their term is a 2-year term. It's usually between July 1 and June 30th. A member can serve as a chair for a total of 2 years. And so conceivably, your chair could be the chair for upward to 4 years. And that's pretty consistent with how other states operate as far as the composition and the tenure. So we go to the next slide. Again, just kind of goes through the reason I bring executive committee, a lot of the meetings that you might go to with the state, it's usually somebody like Jerry or Veronica or Greta that might be running the meeting. In this meeting, the people that run this meeting is your executive committee. I always have a hard time when I walk into a training like this and somebody like Greta is there and all of a sudden Greta doesn't say a lot, and that's not like Greta. And I don't mean that as the state directors have a lot to say, but just know that Greta is there to listen and ultimately will say, when it's her time, and it was her time on the agenda and she spoke, And so just know that's just how it is. So if we go to the next slide, again, just some general, Tiffany presides over all the meetings, calls the meetings to order. The executive committee, usually there's a member that is on all subcommittees as well. And then again, the executive committee just performs the duties that are listed in your bylaws. So, and then if we go to the vice chair, again, the prime issue with the vice chair is if your chair is unable to be at a meeting for whatever reason, then they would be the surrogate for the chair. And they would have to know, again, a little bit about Robert's rules, open meeting requirements, etc. So, and so if we go to the next, again, your ad hoc committees, and again, there'll be times where the committees will be formed, and that is at the discretion of your chair to conduct the business of the panel as needed. The chair may appoint an ad hoc committee chair, and the executive committee may assign individuals to serve on these committees. Any ad hoc committee established shall be provide support of the duties of the advisory panel, excuse me, as outlined in the federal law and regulations. So just know there might be an issue that comes up, and the chair, the executive, maybe we need to form an ad hoc committee to look at this and study it and bring advice back to the full committee. So, Tiffany, Jeremy, is there any current ad hoc committees that are formed?
I have the worst time with this microphone.
That's okay.
There are not at this time, but we reserve the right to have ad hoc committees.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like this because it really leaves things open-ended and as needed. In some bylaws, they actually list out, maybe 5 ad hoc committees. The problem with that is that those committees kind of live on. And I think the purpose here is you have an issue, you want to address it, you form an ad hoc committee, and then it's dissolved when it's no longer needed. And so it really gives you that flexibility. So next part is again all about Greta. I don't know if she's still there. But next slide. One of the most difficult jobs in education is the state director of special education. And, they're over general supervision, which basically is everything in IDA that pertains to children and youth with disabilities. And they're over all of the 800 and some odd IDA regulations, their annual performance report, everything around dispute resolution, IEP facilitation, mediation, complaint investigations, due process, legislative duties. Now, thank goodness, Greta has a wonderful staff that takes on a lot of this, and she delegates that out to good people. And, that's the only way it could actually be done. Now, if we go to the next slide, these are more specifically about the state director. If asked, they're going to provide current and relevant information on particular issues. And again, Greta might not be doing this. She might be asking Veronica or somebody else to bring in that, or Jared. She serves in ad hoc capacity. She's a non-voting member. She might assist. And again, you have Jared there, and that's, again, not every state has somebody like Jared that, represents the office and helps facilitate this. So a lot of this, Jared would pick up and do. This, again, report on topical issues. So that could be any member of the Office of Special Ed and Early Learning team, depending on their expertise. Provides a state report, and Greta did that today. She kind of went over, what has happened since we last met, what are some of the priorities, what were some of the accomplishments, and I love that, to bring in that positive. A member of her staff will report on the annual performance report and the indicators. There's probably a budget line item in the budget to support this panel and carry on their function. So, there's expenses that are related to this advisory panel. Probably the most important thing is Greta or a member of her staff will provide feedback regarding the panel advice and suggestions. And so things that you advise and suggest and recommend, sometimes those things can't be answered at that time, but later, maybe at the next, or somebody or Greta will come in and just say, hey, you provided this recommendation, and this is what we've done about it, or in regards to it. So again, a little bit more about the state director or an individual like Jared. They're here to support you and make you successful. And you're there to support them and make them successful. So it's a kind of a win-win situation. So if we go to the next part, again, a little bit more about advice and how that pertains. And there's probably people on this line that do more advocacy work or from an organization that approaches more on the advocacy side. When Congress set up this system, they created advisory and advocacy groups, and they worked together. But the very nature, your title is an advisory panel. And so a little bit more about that distinction. So if we go to, again, the slide again, you should be actively involved in meaningful work and providing advice to the Office of Special Ed and Early Learning. And so, in my experience for Kentucky, you will be doing meaningful work and making meaningful suggestions. That's just how you've always been. So you're a working panel. The next slide, again, is just that distinction between advisory and advocacy. If we go to the next slide, again, advocacy, to take sides, to support something, to plead your case, to favor a position, to argue, not necessarily an advisory role, but advocacy does play. When we talk a little bit more about defining advisory, there's going to be times where you do support something. You're pleading your case on a certain issue. You're favoring, and you're doing that based on, but in the final analysis, you're coming to consensus, or you're invoking Robert's rules and taking a vote, and you're moving forward with advice and suggestions. So if we go to the next slide, again, every state, groups are in every state whose purpose is advocacy, and Kentucky is no exception. There are a number. Your Parent Training Information Center would be an example of that. If we move to the next slide, again, what does advisory mean then? Again, if you look at Webster, to give advice, to inform, to counsel, to recommend, to suggest, and to guide. And so that is an advisory, and I'm just saying this from my own long experience, advisory groups have a lot of influence, a lot of say. And so, when you put advisory and advocacy, they are equally as influential, I guess. If you look at the next slide, and in Kentucky, this is more of how your advice or your recommendations are imparted. But again, we talked about that earlier. Your advice, your recommendations will go to the Kentucky Department of Ed, the Office of Special Ed and Early Learning, namely Greta, your state director, and then she'll take that advice and suggestions to other individuals, other levels of government perhaps, or agencies, whatever would be appropriate. So if we look at the next slide, and again, you have this. This is just, and this is from my own perspective, but how does advisory work? And, the first thing is you establish a priority. And you might do that through priority setting. And I know this group has done that where they come up with 3 or 4 priorities for the year and they work on those priorities. I'm going to give you an example of one I've experienced in another state, but they came up with a priority of extended school year. And the fact that extended school year services in that particular state was having some challenges. And that was brought up because certain parents on that advisory committee brought it up. And so they asked the state director, would you give us some other data around extended school year? And so that particular data or director went to their monitoring data and they looked at it and they discovered that there were a lot of non-compliance areas that were discovered when the state went in to monitor them around extended school year. So they substantiated that priority by looking at data. And an N of 1 is not sufficient. You need to look at a variety of sources of data and before you can establish whether you might have a systemic issue. The second part of advisory is really important because, again, once you establish a priority, you want to build the capacity of the advisory panel to be, knowledgeable about that. We can't assume that everybody on the line here today, for example, knows about extended school year or has experience about it. So again, the executive committee in this state asked the state office if they could bring in more information about extended school year data, experience, et cetera, which they did. And so they basically built the capacity of that advisory panel to better provide advice and guidance. It is very, very dangerous to provide advice around issues that you really don't understand or maybe have experience about. So you need to all be at a level together of understanding. And then after that, you talk about it, and Tiffany leads you in discussion, and maybe people come in and present on it again, but you might bring in your own individual perspective. And that's where you might sound as though you're an advocate. But if you're a parent out there on the advisory panel and you've experienced extended school year from your child, and maybe it was a challenge, then you're going to be a little passionate about that. But that's okay to bring that in. You're also going to reach out, if you can, to other partners and ask them what their experience has been. And so in that advisory panel, people did that. And again, Tiffany is leading discussion, but ultimately you're going to come to a place in this process where you're ready to provide advice and suggestions. And in the state I'm referring to, they ultimately came up with 2 suggestions or recommendations. The one was, is it possible for the state to develop some guidance around extended school year? And so that's what's being worked on now. They're putting together a user-friendly parent, and they're working with their parent center to do that. So it is user-friendly. And so there'll be guidance out there that everybody will look at and hopefully understand. And secondly, training. And so once we get this guidance document, let's train on it. And so the state's going to do that in 2 ways. They're going to put modules or podcasts online where people can just go in and listen. And they're also going to provide training for those that ask for that training around the state. They also got higher ed involved or involving higher ed. So the people on the panel that represent the teacher training program or a learning, a learning program, leadership, I'm sorry, a leadership program. Some of the curriculum, they're trying to bolster the curriculum around extended school year at the higher ed level. So teachers and administrators will get that at that level. So as they move into districts and charters, they'll have some understanding. So ultimately, that'll come to in your case, to Greta and her staff, and she's going, probably one of three things are going to happen at that point after the recommendations are given. And by the way, the recommendations will ultimately be part of your annual report. These are the 4 things we dealt with, extended school year. These were the recommendations that were provided by the panel. So, ultimately, in the state in question that I'm talking about, the director came back, and she could have taken 3 different approaches. Yes, I like the recommendations that you're given, and we're going to move forward with them, and this is how we're going to do it, and we'll be periodically coming back and giving you those updates on how things are going. The director might have also said, we like some of your recommendations, but not all. And these are the things we like, and we're going to move forward. But maybe on these others, we've decided to move in a different direction. Or in a very rare case, the director might say, thank you, but we're moving in a different direction. In my career, that's rarely happened, but just know, yeah, thank you, Audrey. That could happen. But, usually new panel members, well, how does advisory work? How do we get priorities to work on? And where does that advice ultimately go to? So hopefully you on the line today will have some, you're going to see this played out. It might not look like John's schematic of advisory or exercising, but it basically plays out similar to this, maybe in a little different way. So let's go to our next slide, and just know that Audrey, if we go to the next slide.
While I switch to the next slide, it looks like your camera has been switched off again.
Uh-oh. No, some of you just don't want to see me, and I totally understand that. So again, creating change, just know whenever change occurs that, you take a step forward, but you're bound to disturb certain things. So, change is hard. And so part of the advisory process, once you've recommended and the director and you're moving forward, but the state director is going to involve other people, perhaps bring in other stakeholders to be part of that change. But change is hard, but it usually moves slowly, but there are times where there are some issues. So we have about 15 minutes. We'll go to our last section. And we'll go to the first slide. Again, this is your duties. And again, I've said a lot today, but I would say that these next few slides are critical. I really, when Jared sent me your agenda for today, the first thing that I seen on your agenda are your duties and your purpose. And I love that. So for you new members, as you're attending meetings, and if there's issues that are being discussed, look down at those 5 duties and maybe ask yourself, what duty under IDA does this discussion fall under? And so, it's a good way of getting to know your duties a little bit better. I think the two things that all members should say to themselves, what duty does this and it might be more than one of the duties. And secondly, how does it pertain to children and youth with disabilities in Kentucky? But this first duty is critical. Having a working understanding of the duties under IDEA is critical. All work and meeting agenda items should relate to one or more of the duties. And so if we go to the next slide, two other suggestions that I might give you, and I think you do this, and if you were all meeting physically together, you might have a little tent on the tables, around the tables, and you would have the duties listed on it, maybe a nameplate of some sort, just again to remind people. But again, first duty, advise the state. When you see SEA, we're talking about the Office of Special Ed and Early Learning. But again, advise the state of unmet needs within the state in the education of children with disabilities. Now, one of the great examples of this is COVID. When COVID occurred, we had a lot of unmet needs. And so this became an issue under this particular duty. And so again, most, if not all, panels changed priorities and we're still feeling the impact, obviously, of COVID today. Another example, serving students not being adequately served in juvenile and adult corrections. I'm just giving you examples of ones that have popped up in other states. And so actually this was brought up by a panel member in another state, and they were in juvenile corrections, and they soon learned that they didn't understand that they still had obligations when somebody was incarcerated in a juvenile correctional facility, and they had an IEP in maybe a school district or charter that they attended. So again, the state, that became a priority, an unmet need. The special ed director, the director of juvenile corrections came together. They pulled together a stakeholder group, and they dealt with that. And now that particular state has one of the better systems of addressing juvenile children that are also IDA eligible. So I would say this, I always say this to me is one of your most important, because if you have an unmet need, that might lead to a denial of a free, appropriate public education. So be mindful of this one. Next slide is, again, rules and regulations. I think it was Melanie that gave the overview of your legislative update. And, if there's any rules or regulations proposed by the state regarding the education of children with disabilities, that should be brought before the advisory panel. And so that was certainly done today with your legislative session, and certain rules or regulations that might be changed or amended or created that might impact. So, the one that always comes to my mind, if we ever have a change in our federal law and it's reauthorized, ultimately, if that were to occur, then the Office of Special Ed Programs would create new federal regulations to be in concert with the new federal law. And then ultimately, every state in the country would have to change their state regulations to be in concert with the new federal regulations. And that's where you would be pulled into the process to give advice and recommendations about possible new state special ed regulations. So hopefully, as I'm talking here today, you're seeing the gravity of your job and the importance of your job. You're right here at the highest level. You're right at the table where all of this is occurring. Now, if we go to the third duty, uh, this 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 really came into play in 2004. And that is advise the state in developing evaluations and reporting data to the secretary. And in this case, the secretary of the U.S. Department of Education under Section 618 of the Act, which is that part of IDA that deals with data. And so this is where all states were asked to develop a state performance plan, an annual performance report. And so this became a really, really important duty after 2004, because most panels, if not all panels that I've worked with, they're involved with the annual performance report. And they're aware that it's submitted to OSEP in February, and they're aware of the gravity of this, namely your level of determination. And in your case, it's worked out really, really well. So just know that number 3 will become important, and this usually comes into play usually in the fall of the year, or November, December. So if we go to number 4, Greta talked about this one before, and it's one of your duties. You went through the differentiated monitoring process. You received a final report. You had a minor action that you had to take, which you did right away. But if that report had non-compliance areas that needed to be addressed, then you would be made aware of those non-compliance areas, and you would be part of maybe providing suggestions and advice on how to correct those non-compliance areas. So again, the DSM, but again, every state, Greta could get a call tomorrow and say, we want to talk to you about fiscal issues in special ed. And so, maybe, if the state had a non-compliance area in fiscal, again, you would be aware of that and part of the solution to that. Number 5 is, I like number 5. And again, Kentucky does a great job on this, but again, advise the state in developing and implementing policies relating to the coordination of services for children with disabilities. This one, again, when you look at the written comments in the IDA, it's all about working together or encouraging states, encouraging advisory panels to make recommendations. We have this issue with, again, if we come back to juvenile corrections, and we need to coordinate and work with the Department of Correction and solve that problem or that challenge together, not try to solve it independent of or divorced from. Most of the government, government agencies or departments in every state have a memorandum of understanding on how they're going to communicate and work with each other. So if you have a Department of Health, and undoubtedly there's probably an MOU on how the Department of Ed and the Department of Health are going to work together. So again, advisory panel members, just be mindful. It's all about working together. Again, when you work together, you're going to solve that issue, and you're going to have a common understanding of how that challenge was addressed and how we're moving forward. What if we go to the next slide? In your bylaws, you do have one additional duty that is listed in your bylaws, and it's a result of an OSEP letter, and it's just about, again, working in collaboration with juvenile and adult corrections. Now, Audrey, if we could skip forward to 14, I just have some closing summary and closing remarks, and then I'll turn it back to Tiffany and the executive committee. But just in summary and conclusion, we go to the next slide, effective practices. When I think about Kentucky, this is more like a self-assessment, but you should have a close working relationship with your state director, and you certainly do. You have membership orientation. You approach the work as advisory, not advocacy. You do meaningful work. You have an annual meeting to set priorities. Your priorities are determined by data, and your SPP, APR, your state systemic improvement plan are examples of data. You have an ongoing communication between Greta and her staff, the panel, and the executive committee. And again, Jared is that bridge, and I just love that. But when I read through those effective practices, Kentucky is right on par. If we go to the next page, again, Part C, connection. And again, I had mentioned before, an example of doing that is to have a panel member that kind of has the connection between the advisory panel and the interagency coordinating council, that you support the Office of Special Ed and early learning efforts, their improvement efforts, and you can become part of that and giving advice and recommendations to them to achieve their improvement efforts. Again, you have established bylaws, you do dedicated staff, you have Jared again and others. You meet four to six times a year. You're right on target there. You have a collaborative agenda building process, which you do in service, about confidentiality. One thing a lot of panels lose sight of is marketing the advisory panel. When you think of Kentucky, how many people out there, how many parents of children with disabilities, are aware of the advisory panel here in Kentucky? User-friendly annual report, and again, you're looking at results, and even though again compliance issues are critical. And then the next slide is just a reminder, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So again, encourage you, as you always have, work together as a team in collaboration with your Office of Special Ed. Again, the next slide is just another, none of us is as smart as all of us. And everybody on this line is very smart. You put all those smart people together, working together, and you're going to go far. And then finally, one person does make a difference. And so everybody on this panel is important. You have your knowledge, you have your experience, and you will make a difference individually. So remember that. I had a really good friend, and she's unfortunately passed away, and many of you knew her, Judy Human. But I had a lot of times where I worked side by side. I've never worked with anybody that works harder than she does, but she was one person. She made a difference, but she brought people together. And by doing that, Section 504 occurred to a large degree, the education of all handicapped children. Every parent out there, I always admire the parents of children with disabilities, your parent training information, and again, your state director. Again, kudos to not only Greta, but the other 56 state directors in the country that try to hold things together and move forward in a positive way. So with that, unless there's any burning questions, I know I'm a little over time here, but any questions that before I turn it back?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for the honor and the privilege of being here today.
John,
You know,
David Wickersham just has a quick question for you, please.
Okay, go ahead, David.
Am I on?
There you are.
I think
Yeah.
I am. Okay,
good.
cool. Hey, this is David Wickersham. John, I don't want to keep you long. I wanted to get, excuse me, if I could get you to quickly address something for us, just kind of from a national perspective, which we kind of lack here at the state level. One of the things that we're trying to strike the right balance with is not overburdening the SAPEC with kind of some day-to-day stuff that goes on with us, but being sure that we're bringing them in to the extent that is appropriate and necessary. And one of the specific things that comes up for us, you talked a lot about the focus that OSEP has and that we have on improving results. And one of the things that we get into is there's kind of some natural tension there between the SEA and between OSEP about, you know, what are your requirements? What should you be focusing on? How are we monitoring those? How are we being monitored? And then there's also that tension kind of facing the other way between us as the SEA and the LEAs. So in terms of helping to address those tensions and feedback that we get about our general supervisory practices and things like that, do you have kind of a national perspective on how involved the SAPEC should be in feedback that we get, say, from other stakeholders in that if we're getting a lot of feedback from LEAs or from other folks? Like we had a big state audit here last year that gave us a lot of feedback about our monitoring practices and things to focus on, but recognizing that the SAPEC's time is limited, we're not sure how involved other states would make their SAPEC and things like that. So I just didn't know if you had anything from a national perspective on that that might help give us some ideas about the best way to go on that.
Oh, that's that's a big one, David. It really is. You know, I think that my advice is, and you know, I would say this in any state, but you know, ultimately you know, the Office of Special Education and Early Learning have this overarching general supervision responsibility. I think in my time as at this level, there's always been some tension between the federal and the state. And to me, that's just natural because, you know, their job is to make sure that things are being done not only in a state, but throughout the country. And so there's always going to be a little bit of an edge there. I think it's important for the advisory panel, and I think there are some panels that'll when they're doing their priority setting, they kind of address this during the priority setting because there's national priorities and then there's state priorities, there's school district priorities, but you know, to kind of give the panel a big picture on what those priorities are generally that are not only impacting Kentucky, but every state in the country. An example of that would be recruitment and retention of qualified staff. Another one would be mental health issues. One that has surfaced, unfortunately, in the last 5 or 10 years is just general safety of children, not only with disabilities, but otherwise in public schools. So, you know, you just need to be mindful and include that big picture discussion when you're doing priorities. And certainly, you know, I have my top 10 and I usually, that's a totally different presentation, but it's always good to have that. But you know, it's just really hard, David, to answer that. And every state approach is a little different. Some states really lean on their panel, others not so much. But ultimately it comes back to Greta and her team on what needs to be done that way. Yeah,
Okay, thank you. Thanks for letting me hop up. Sorry about that.
you bet. Okay. Anything else? Okay, Tiffany, it's all yours.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. At this time, I will hand it over to Jared for public comment.
So we did not receive any emails for public comment for SAPEC. We did not have anyone sign up for public comment for the day, but we do need to open the floor for anyone should public comment want to be made. So is there anyone in the gallery, in the room, who would like to make public comment at this time? Finding none, Chair, the floor is yours.
All right, it does note exit slip,
Correct.
so it'll be emailed to our members online as well.
There it is. It's actually on your screen there. There's also a short link there, 128.pl/small UEF capital L1. I will be emailing that out to you all as well for your exit slip for the meeting. If you've got any comments, concerns, anything like that, positive or otherwise, feel free to put that on there. I do realize that today's meeting is a tad bit of a marathon. It's one of those things we want to make sure, particularly with so many new members, that we did have that available to you with John, and we appreciate his input and his time with us. So with that, I'm going to return it back over to the chair.
We actually have our next meeting scheduled for June 10th, 9 a.m. Jared will send out, I'm assuming, agenda and making sure that we have a count on who is available prior to that. At this time, is there a motion to adjourn?
Jenny Ward, motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Laura Tipton, second.
All right, we will have to
Who
take,
seconded? Lord, oh, okay.
we will do a roll call. Again, if you're in favor, aye. Opposed, nay. Amanda Wright.
Alex Wright, aye.
Amy Smith.
Aye.
Cora McNabb.
Aye.
Eileen Hoover.
Aye.
Emily Fox.
Aye.
Heather McConnell.
Aye.
Jackie Hawley. Excuse me.
Aye.
Jenny Ward.
Aye.
Tal Curry. Lachina Crothers.
Aye.
Laura Tipton.
Aye.
Layla Frazier. Tiffany Clark. Aye. Zachary Stumbo. And Greta Hilton.
Aye.
We are adjourned.